Hello everyone, we are back and I have just finished the button band for this Douglas Cardi that I'm knitting, not knitting it live on YouTube, but going through every step of the process, not as a tutorial, but more around how we think about and approach knitting sweaters and garments, things that have importance for fit. So this is part 11 now, I think, of the whole series, and you can see them all tucked in a playlist. But I've been working on it pretty fast. It's now been 2 weeks since I started and actually cast on, but there was a lot before that where we were planning and like swatching and blocking and all that stuff to make sure that we're going to execute it well, because there's nothing better than knitting with confidence and knowing that you're going to be happy with the result. At least for someone like me, my brain gets really anxious sometimes. And so I do whatever I can along the way to make sure I don't need to feel anxious. So in our last video, we talked about the modifications I made for this button band before I knit it, because I was worried about yarn chicken, which means running out of yarn, and when you're playing chicken with your yarn to see if you're going to have enough. I don't like surprises, so what we ended up doing, because of the style of the button band and the fact that I don't plan on wearing buttons with it or putting buttons on it, I made it a little slimmer, so less wide. It kind of matches, and this was just a happy accident, it kind of matches the size of the stripes there, which I think is great. So I just wanted to check in on that. And then what we're going to talk about today is my sleeve planning. And sleeves are always something that I end up modifying slightly usually, or double checking or planning. And particularly with this one, because again, I have this much yarn left total. I do have an extra skein of this color, but I don't think that's going to be helpful for me. So I want to make sure that I'm going to be confident that this is enough yarn for me to finish both sleeves, and thus we'll be finished with the sweater except for the pockets, which I can use the extra of this for, no problem. But so where am I going to start? Where am I going to start? Okay, so I want to show you the nice clean button band and how great it looks. Especially really happy with how clean the lines are. And yeah, it was pretty simple to do. It just took a while, that's all, because it went all the way around that neckline. Okay, so my approach to the sweater sleeve, let me talk it through just a little bit. You can see I've done a couple things here already. So what I did first and foremost, and I'll try to recreate it here, but I did this off camera, was I know how long I need this sleeve to be, and you can see how the stripes are going to go that way. And I want to end up on this color, which is my sort of primary color, so that I can do the cuff of my sleeve. So my sleeve will roughly look like a little patch of this. So I know that I want that to be 14 inches until we hit this cuff. So I kind of went and put my 14 inches there and said, okay, where do I end up here, to figure out what color to start with. And I decided I'm going to sort of stretch out a bit. I'm starting with the Doc's color, which is this color on the sleeve, so that I can end up with my last stripe being this gold color here, and then I can go right into the cuff. Now, this is all going to be really dependent on how much yarn I have left and if this is even going to work at all. So I'm going to count the number of stripes I need. So if I start here, I'm going to end up with 2 Docs, 2 Courtney, 2 Cedar, 2 Kurt, 1 Angst, and then the cuff. And so I'm just going to basically call that 2 Angst as well, because it's also going to get smaller. So if you kind of visualize the sleeve, it's going to get thinner as you go towards the cuff because you're decreasing on it. So it's actually going to look probably like this, but also mirrored over here. And I want to make sure I have enough yarn to do 2 of those sleeves. So the way that I've been approaching it, so the first thing I did go up a needle size. I'm using my Tao Goose shorties, which I can show you what these ones look like. The red package is smaller. These ones are sort of the medium sizes. And then there's, I think, a new one that is, I want to say like yellow or like highlighter green, that is bulkier size needles, larger needles, in the size set. But I like it because I can just keep going around and around really quick. But when I knit in the round, and I think this has been something I've heard from a lot of people as well, they tend to knit a little bit tighter, just because of the small circumference. You just kind of add a little bit more tension by accident. So I went up a needle size to a 5mm instead of my body 4.5. And it still looks like it might be a little bit smaller stitches. So I'm going to look at my gauge here. Let me get my little ruler out. That's the first thing I want to check now that I've done a little bit of knitting. And the best way to check it is just to knit some. And do not be afraid to rip out your sleeves, because I will always rip out my sleeves multiple times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, almost 10. I was like 9.5, or a little bit more than that. So almost 10 stitches in 2 inches, which means almost 20 in 4 inches, which is almost the exact same. This was 19 stitches in 4 inches, and this is 19 and a bit. So that's pretty close. If I do rip it out, I could go up a needle size, but I'm happy with that. You can already see the stitches do look like maybe they're a little bit smaller, just visually, because you get really comfortable in big knitting. You just kind of zip along, and here you go. And then in circumference knitting in the round, this was flat, this was round. So gauge differences are inevitable, but I think it's right that I went up a needle size. And if anything, I would maybe want to go up another needle size, but it looks good to me. So you can see that I did start with docks. I did have a little concern because I did my shoulder seam with docks. So there's a lot of docks, this gray color there and here. But I think it's fine, and I think it's going to look great no matter what. And I'm going to keep, obviously, the sleeve pattern as much as I can. So the next question is, how much yarn did I use for each stripe? Knowing that each stripe is going to be smaller than the one before it, because again, we're going to be decreasing as we go. And I've already started those decreases. You can already kind of see that trajectory. So in order to check that, what I did was, before I started knitting these 2 stripes on the sleeve, I wrote down the weight of each remaining ball here. And now what I can do is I can actually weigh, for the 2 stripes I did, I can weigh those and see what the difference is. So let's do that live together. Oh, it's going to be so exciting. And I'm really hoping that if this stripe is less than 1/4 of the total, then I'm golden, because I know I can get 4 full-size stripes, and I don't need full-size stripes. I'm going to be smaller stripes. So let's see, 23 grams. Already I can tell that's not what I was hoping for, because if it used 10 grams, if it used 8 grams or less, I'd be golden. I still don't think we're too far off though, and I'll explain that in a second. Let me weigh Courtney, which is what the second full complete stripe is. Oh, interesting. 28. And again, this is not an exact science. Oh, now it's gone to 29. So this is a great example of why it's not an exact science and why I can't write properly, because I never write anymore. Weight is not a great one, especially if it's only going down to the gram and not like tenths of a gram or anything. So we're saying that first stripe took 10 grams of yarn. We're saying the second one went from 29 to, or 36 to 29, which is only 7 grams. So we're probably somewhere in the middle, actually. But I'm going to say, like, conservatively, let's say the average stripe is going to be 7 grams, maybe 8 grams. Then on average, I think we're going to be okay. And the reason I say that is because each one's going to get, like, the third stripe is going to be probably 7 grams or less, because we're going to do decreases. The fourth stripe is going to be probably 6 or 5. So I feel like we're probably okay, but it is definitely going to be tight. And it's going to be so tight that I think I'm not going to snip the yarn, because I've left the yarn attached for the stripes. I'm not going to snip it yet, because then when I snip it, if I end up ripping it back and then reknitting it, I may not have the right amount of yarn, and then I'm going to waste some yarn. So I'm going to leave it unsnipped and go one full section with all the stripe repeats, and then do another weigh in and see where we're at. Another thing I will point out is when I did the math in part 10, I guess it would have been the last one, around angst. to see if I'm going to have enough once I did my less wide button band. The math around that was that I should have at least 30 grams of angst left, and I have 34 grams. So that math all tracked, which is great. So I've got my plan. I feel iffy, but generally okay, that it's probably going to work out, but I won't know again until I get further down this sleeve if I'm going to have enough of each yarn. The goal is, again, if I finish the first sleeve and have half of each of these or more left, then I should be okay. I also do have for angst, I'm going to put a little star here to remind myself even, I still have the swatches that I did in some of the earlier parts of this series that I can pull out and use that yardage if I need to. So the last thing I usually check at this point of the sleeve, other than like putting it on my body, I know this is going to be fine. Like you want to make sure it's not too tight up top if you don't like that sort of, they call it like a pencil sleeve, where it's like super tight and really thin across your arms. I don't have that type of body where that style looks great on me. Certain sweaters that I've made do have pretty tight sleeves, and I like that. But for this one, this is like a throw-on cardi while I'm working from home on my computer or something. So really, this is more like I want it to be bulky up top. Plus, I'm in a heavier body season right now anyway, so it's good to give myself some breathing room so I don't feel any insecurity around it. So that being said, the last thing that I usually check at this stage with my sleeves, knowing I might fully rip this out, like I usually take at least 2 attempts at a sleeve, sometimes 3. But the last thing I kind of do is I eyeball the size, and I get to know my own sizes well. So this is 7¼ inches on this half. And maybe I'll draw like a picture of the sleeve is going to end up looking like this, right? And this is going to be the cuff at the end. This sleeve's going to happen to be striped. That's probably not the exact right number of stripes. But if I'm laying it flat, this is 7.25 inches. At the bottom, at the cuff here, I typically like it to be around 4, maybe a little bit more than 4 inches for this, because I want it to sit kind of, you know, not sit too tight on me. 4 inches, it would be like a pretty tapered sleeve. So I'm going to say, just for the ease of the math, I'm going to say 4.25 inches here. And stick with me here. From the gauge, I know that I cast on 37 stitches per side. I don't think that's going to be a spoiler for the pattern. But if you do want to make it, please go buy the pattern. Don't try to rely on me here. I'm not giving up details or any details that aren't publicly available. But I can calculate even from the gauge that 37-ish inches is leading to this. And then down at the bottom here, I want that to be, around 21 inches, which means that over the course of this sleeve, I need to decrease 37 minus 21, that's 16 stitches overall. And then every decrease round, it depends on the pattern, but most of them you're doing 2 stitches per decrease round. So that's 8 decrease. Look at me trying to write. I am sorry, but we don't write things on paper very much anymore. 8 decrease rounds over the span of the sleeve before I get to the cuff. And so I'll double check this against the pattern, and I may need to adjust how many decreases or how spaced out they are, because I know I want to aim for sort of that 8 decreases per round, 8 decrease rounds spread out. And it's not necessarily spread out through this whole sleeve. Often it's kind of spread out to like here, and then you knit straight for a little bit. But overall, I want to make sure that this is generally on target, this 8, with what's written in the pattern for my sleeve size. And if it's not, I may choose to adjust the spacing of my decrease rounds to kind of spread them out over an appropriate amount. So that's just my general takeaway. What I typically do is I'll knit to at least kind of halfway or more. In this case, I'm going to knit to at least 5 stripes. And then I'm going to check in and see if I like how fast that decrease is going when I put it on my arm. Is it like too tight? Because I don't want it to be tight. I don't want it, at least for this style, I don't want it to be like pulling like this while it's going over any part of my arm. Some of them, if they are pencil sleeves and I do want them tight, I'm okay with it pulling a little bit, but this is not. This is a comfy, a little bit loosey. Remember, we're aiming for around 10 inches or more of positive ease, which means overall circumference is going to be at least 10 inches more than my sort of widest part of my chest, my fullest part of my chest. So that's what we're going for. I think it's really important for people who are trying to gain confidence in knitting garments to know that even though I've made many, many sweaters at this point and I've come a long way, I will always rip out sleeves. Typically more than once. Sometimes I'll do it 3, 4, 5 times because I want to make it right. Because that is why we're making our own garments, partially because we love knitting and we love the creative process. But another part of it is we want to build exactly what we want for our distinct bodies, and everyone's body is different. Everyone likes a different thing. It's not one size fits all, and patterns try to be inclusive for the most part. Designers try to be inclusive, but there's always going to be things that we can mod and that we maybe should mod. And for me, sleeves is one of the main things that I will mod. Sleeves, and also often body length, based on my personal preferences and my body and what season my body is in at that moment as well. So that's sort of my little, did I just get up on a soapbox there? Maybe a little bit, but I'm just saying it's very normal to rip out sleeves multiple times. And it's very normal, at least for me, to adjust and redo the math on sleeves, no matter how good the pattern is, no matter how well written it is, because it's how it's going to fit on my body. And the sleeves are really an important piece of that fit to me personally. So if you're someone who thinks that you should be able to do your sleeve right to pattern and never pull it out, that's great if you can pull that off and if that works for you. And every designer is going to be different too. Like, designers tend to design more towards their own body's style and preferences, and then allow you to adjust based on that. And good ones will actually give you guidelines on that adjustment. And Andrea, I think, does a great job of that. I've knit a ton of her patterns. I'm a big fan. I kind of learned how to knit from her patterns. So I feel very comfortable with how her sizing works and the mods that I tend to do with it. But just know, and of all this little rant at the end, just know that it's very normal to have to take several attempts at making the sleeve work for you. And then make sure that you're always writing down what you're doing for the next sleeve so that you can repeat it exactly and you don't have to go back and like reverse engineer what you did, because that just makes it trickier. So I'm going to continue on the sleeve. I think the next part will hopefully be having finished sleeves and moving on to the last finishing steps, which for this pattern are actually placing the pocket where we place the afterthought section for it. So just showing how I turn this into an actual pocket. And then finishing, and that means all these ends need to get woven in, and blocking and all that. So there's a lot of finishing steps as well and considerations that we'll talk through. But for now, we are very close to actually finishing the knitting on this. As long as I get enough time to focus on it, I think I should be able to be done this sweater within a week. And that would make it a 3-week knit overall, which is kind of crazy because there's a lot to it. But hope this is helpful to someone. I hope this stuff kind of makes sense to you, but it's how I think about it so that I can just knit with at least some level of confidence that I'm not going to be hosed in the end and not be able to actually do what I want to be able to do with the yarn that I have. Great. All right. We'll see you in the next video.